So, as Joel led you off, I started developing for Palm Pilot when I was a senior in college at a small university outside of Portland, Oregon. um, Started writing for Palm Pilot. Actually ended up building this product because I was an accounting major and found that traditional calculators were a pain in the rear end to use. And thought, well, geez, if I could take a spreadsheet and meld it with a calculator and then open it up so people can write their own kind of spreadsheets in this thing, we could have a really popular platform. And that worked quite well, actually. I developed for Palm. We grew the company, developed for Windows Mobile. Actually, we started when it was Palm-sized PC before it was Pocket PC, so I'm really dating myself now, folks. Then those both started to crash, and we developed for BlackBerry. We developed for iOS, Android, and most recently we tried to kill ourselves by developing for Tizen, which is a new open source platform by Samsung and Intel. Power One's been my mainstay product for a very long time. It's proved very popular. Once upon a time, we generated 60 to 160 bucks a copy. We generated 20 bucks, 30 bucks a year in upgrade revenues. I still have customers, believe it or not, that go buy Palm Pilots off of eBay just to run our software on it, which is about the biggest compliment I have ever had in my entire life on anything. Although it'd be nice if they paid me a little more money after all these years, but you know, you can't win them all. Obviously, this world changed pretty substantially when iOS shipped. You know, $60, $160 apps became $10 apps, which became $5 apps, which became $2 apps. All the rules of marketing and building a business completely changed in that time period. Over the last few years, we've been working on a new concept. It's a mobile and web service. This is the only time I'll tell you about it in the whole presentation, but it's a mobile and web service called Equals. The idea is that we want to take numbers and figure out how to simplify them. How do we make working with numbers as simple as writing a sentence, working with text? You can check this product out at equalsapp.com. The only reason I tell you all this is because this has been multiple years of thinking that goes into this presentation. I've been thinking about these rules, these ideas, and I've been writing them down for about a year now. And Joel called me about 10 months ago and asked me if I'd be interested in doing a presentation. And I said, oh, that would be fun. In fact, this will be a lot better than doing a blog post. So I started to work on this 10 rules of modern mobile apps presentation and came to the conclusion that it was absolutely the wrong title last week after I started working on it. And I realized that a much better title for this presentation would be Make Businesses, Not Apps. It's time for us to start thinking about the next generation here. Yeah, I like to think about the first 5 years of the internet as being somewhat applicable to the first 5 years of modern mobile app development, as we'll call it. The first 5 years of the internet, we had Yahoo, we had eBay, we had Amazon, but we barely had Google. There was no Facebook. In fact, what was he? Probably 10 years old in 1997. We had no Twitter. We had all the things that we are comfortable with and knowledge about today. Almost none of those services were around after 5 years. There is so much opportunity waiting for us in the mobile space, and I hope I'll give you some ideas and some things to think about today. So, as we all know, or at least all of us who've tried, the App Store is a pretty amazing place. I find it an amazing place from a customer perspective, which we've all done, and I find it amazing from a development perspective because I came from a world where we had to help customers with installing, uninstalling, deleting, recovering, getting refunds, and all the other garbage. We used to spend a ton of money. 80–90% of my support costs were tied up in just helping people get stuff installed and reinstalled. All of this is now taken away with the App Store, and that's had effects, which we'll go into here in a little bit. Now, what this has turned into, of course, is that we have 60 billion plus apps have been downloaded in the history of the App Store. And that's created a very different world, a very different environment than one that we've ever had before from a software perspective. And obviously, it's caused an awful lot of people to go out and write apps thinking that they can make a lot of money at it. That gold rush mentality as we've had before, most of which I hope will be gone here soon. But what hasn't changed is that it's still pretty darn expensive to write an app. Down here at the bottom here, it's probably hard for some of you in the back to see, but I used the full screen, by the way. I didn't know it was going to be so low. $8,000 to write a small app. If you think about it, that's really only a couple of weeks worth of work if you're getting paid any reasonable rate as a developer these days. Large apps, we could be talking 250,000 or more. Server components, we start adding up into the $500,000. So it's still really, really expensive to write ourselves app, but the question is if you stick this thing in the App Store, what kind of revenue are we going to make off of it? And it turns out that the average revenue per app is only about $4,000. Well, okay, fine. None of us are average, right? None of us believe that we're only going to make the average. Well, let me tell you that this is actually a good case scenario. Because what we know is that 85% of the revenue in the App Store goes to the top 100 apps in the App Store. And that's a pretty elusive category to break into. I did it once, by the way. We broke into the top 100 once when the iPad shipped and Apple was promoting us, and that's pretty much the end of it from that point forward. So 85% of the revenue is going to that top 100 apps, which means that the rest of us are basically grappling over the 15% of revenue that is left over. This curve, by the way, doesn't look too drastically different than the wealth distribution in this country. So I did a little math for you. $10 billion, 15%, 860,000 apps roughly means that the average is actually about $1,700 an app, not $4,000 an app. There's no gold left in them hills. It's time to be thinking about these problems differently, which means it's time to stop thinking about apps and start thinking about businesses. So I know that most of us are probably technology people and we're developers, so I'm going to give you a Marketing 101 class in about 3 slides to help us kind of frame this conversation. Product, we all know that one well, what we develop. Price that we're charging, place is where we distribute the applications, and promotion is how we get people to go out and buy it. Now, what's happened in the App Store? There you go, that was Marketing 101, we're done. Now, what happens in the App Store? The App Store has distorted the marketing mix. The App Store has distorted the marketing mix by removing place from our equation. We don't have a choice. The only place to distribute, the only place to sell our apps is in the App Store. And this has had a pretty profound effect. There's one place to buy, which means everyone looks there, which means promotion happens only in the App Store. Well, what do we have to promote? We've got about 5 screenshots. We've got a description that nobody reads. We have an app icon, and we have a name of a product. Because of that, it's almost impossible to differentiate our products, right? And because of that, price drops almost to 0. Price drops to 99 cents because that's the only way to make this model work. So we get distortion in the product mix because of this situation. So I think App Store, we should change the slogan. It's a great place to distribute, it's a lousy place to make money. And that's why I think it's time for us to really rethink everything that we're doing here and rethink the way we're doing this. Like I said, let's make businesses and not apps. So what I'm going to do in the rest of this presentation is just give you some things to think about. I'm not saying that every one of these things match up perfectly with the businesses that you're trying to form. Some of them may make sense, some of them may not. But what I want to do is give you a framework and some things to think about as we go through. This was the basis for the original 10, which is actually spread to about 14, so you're getting some bonus in this mix. So the first thing I want you to think about is free. As we've pointed out, there's a ridiculous numbers of apps in the App Store. I'm fully expecting them when Apple has their next event, rumored to be on October 22nd, that this number will be announced as passing 1 million apps in the App Store. That's insane. It's hard to believe that we produce that many apps in this kind of time frame. So I did a little research that I thought everyone would be interested in, and I did some keyword searches, and I did it on a variety of topics that I think that the people in this room will kind of be interested in. So given that keywords are one of the key ways in which we're found, the others being promotion, somebody tells somebody else to go find your app, and of course those top 50 lists in the App Store by category. So I did a little research here for you and did a little search for some basic keywords. And by the way, the search max is out at 2,200. It wouldn't give me results for any more than that. I know for certain that there's about 6,000 calculators in the App Store. Being my area, I've looked a little more closely and even gone to the extent of calculating that stuff. So the numbers are astronomical here. Even a product like Spreadsheets has 232 results for it. Spreadsheets are a really, really complicated product to develop. They're not, particularly on a mobile device, they're really, really hard. They're designed for a desktop, not for a mobile system. And yet 232 search results come up. Okay, so I know what you're all thinking. You're all thinking, well, you know, these are pretty broad category topics, right? I mean, every developer thinks about task lists, about notes lists, about calculators. So given that my background's in calculators and I know a lot of the very niche topics in that area, I did another search for some calculator topics that, let me tell you, are niche topics. So graphing calculators, 88 results. Matrix calculator, 62. Statistics calculators, you know how many people do statistics? About 96. Complex numbers, not much competition there, but there's probably one calculator for every person in the world who actually does complex number math. Hex calculators, 93. So again, I looked at this list and I said, you know what? This is discerning. People are going to poke a hole in this list because they're going to all look at it and say, well, we're all developers, and every developer I've ever met goes, oh, I got a great idea for a calculator. And I always look at them and say, you're nuts, but that's beside the point. For coming from somebody who writes them, that's beside the point. So I started thinking about my dad. My dad's a piano technician. He rebuilds pianos. He tunes pianos. And for most of my lifetime, or at least since Mac laptops in the 1980s, I would say, maybe early 90s, he's been carrying around a piece of software that actually helps him tune pianos. And I'm thinking, you know, how many tuning applications could there possibly be in the App Store? 23. Now let me tell you, there might be 2,000 piano tuners in the entire country. So that means the available market for this thing is probably one person per 100 people per app. So we're talking an astronomical number of apps in the App Store for pretty much every niche product that you can possibly figure out how to make money at. And that's exactly why, by the way, prices have gotten so ridiculously low. 19 cents for an average iPhone app, 50 cents for an average iPad app. And what's even scarier, by the way, is how much of the App Store has actually gone free. 90% of the App Store is now free. Now, it wasn't actually the 90% in this graph that jumped out at me. It was this little green bar right here back in 2010 that jumped out at me. What's that, 4%? But those are all apps over $6. Look at that bar in 2013. Yeah, you can't find it, can you? There is no bar in 2013. The App Store basically has disappeared at this price point. Apps over $5 have basically disappeared in this price point, and $5 is a premium quote-unquote app. So we're definitely in a different world here. The market has shifted to free applications, and I think it's worth giving some pretty serious thought to that. Jeremy Olson with Tapity said this just a week or two ago. And the yellow jumped out at me. He talked to people that were top 10, top 5 apps in each of the categories in the App Store, and he found that they're selling about 25% of the software that they were selling a year ago at the same point within their category. So the revenue for in-app purchases, for purchases within the App Store, for premium apps as they're being called, which is scary that any app that charges you an upfront fee now is being called premium. Those revenues are dropping as well. But to make matters worse, Apple just announced that Pages, Numbers, and Keynote on all 3 platforms are going to go free. Now, if you haven't taken a look at this code, if you've never taken a look at the depths of a spreadsheet, the depths of Keynote, the depths of Pages, these might be the 3 most complicated products in the entire App Store, and they are now going to go free. Look, folks, I don't know how you look at it, but sometimes it just feels like everything is stacked against us. We just can't win. So I highly recommend, we got to start thinking about free. Maybe it's not right for your product, for your service, but it's well worth considering how you can build a business if your app is free. Number two, oh, we got to stop making $5 from a customer once. We got to start thinking about how we're going to make customers happy, ongoing, and willing to pay us on an ongoing basis. The reality is that finding new customers is very hard and very expensive. By the way, my first thought when I saw this is, what in the world does he need with binoculars that big, and what in the world could he possibly be looking at? It's much easier to find customers that love us and are willing to pay us more money on an ongoing basis, hypothetically, easier. You know, in the old days, we used to do this. We did trials to give people a chance to try it, then we charged them a big upfront fee, and then we charged them a little more every year in order to use the products. I don't know, do you guys even have any applications that do this anymore? The only one I can think of anymore that does this is Parallels. And frankly, Parallels drives me nuts with these upgrades every year, right? So we're really moving away from this world of being able to charge for upgrades and move us into a world where we need to generate money on an ongoing basis. Joel Spolsky, founder of, frankly, the most important developer site in the history of developer websites, Stack Overflow, basically said that the only business models he wants to explore anymore are ones where there's mass market components are free, and there's a niche component that makes money off the exhaust fumes of the mass market product. Evernote's been a genius at this. 3 to 5% of their customer base actually pays them money, but they're a $100 million+ business these days. And that's the trick, right? We need to get existing, dedicated, happy customers to pay us a few bucks more. Now, the App Store gives us a few ways to do this. One is in-app purchase. As you can see, most of the revenue being generated in the App Store these days is through in-app purchase, 76%. Some of that is app revenue from paid apps, that's about 5%. The rest of it is all free apps, getting people to pay money on top of that. David Bernard, formerly of AppCubby, and he just changed the name of his company to something that for the life of me I can't remember, so I won't tell you what it is. But sorry? Contrast, why would you remember that? David Bernard had these 4 tweets one day. I tried to find the tweets. You know how impossible it is to find a tweet after somebody has done it? Massive download numbers work really well in the App Store. This is for in-app purchase. This is how games make all their money, right? You get millions and millions of people to download your thing, and then you get a very tiny percentage of them to convert. But it also works for apps with high conversion rates. I heard of an app recently, and again, I can't tell you which one it was, 30–40% conversion rates, which is unbelievable. But talk about a high-need, must-have kind of product. If you have high prices, which you can do in-app purchase much better than you can do as a flat fee in the App Store, those work as well, right? Because now you're getting more money one time from customers than you were before. And the third, of course, is building in subscription models or other kinds of recurring revenue models into the apps. Again, games have figured this puppy out. This was last week. The top 5 apps and the top grossing all of the App Store, every single one of them were free. Notice that I haven't bought a single one of them myself, but every single one of them are free. This is why subscriptions work well. Well, you know, I skipped ahead. So another way to make money here is recurring revenue is through subscriptions. And I like this graph. Ben Thompson over at Stratechery, you got to pronounce that right, he corrects everybody. Ben Thompson put this graph together when he was discussing this. And the bottom line here is that when consumers use an app, particularly productivity apps we're talking about, they get more value out of that application over time. That's that dark blue line that curves up from the bottom. And when we charge a flat fee, man, it's like right here across the chart. That means that the gap between the value that they're getting and the revenue that we're getting is really split apart. So there's motivation on everybody's perspective, for those that care about this stuff, to charge an incremental fee for it. And that's why the stepstone, the stepladder approach here. it matches much more closely the value. So I've put together some examples for you. If you're not familiar with Asana, a task application, they give away a certain number of users for free on your team and then charge you for more, so they're basically making it very valuable for you as a team to use this product. Major League Baseball with their premium content. You're welcome to listen to games, you're welcome to watch their little animations in app, but if you want to watch a game, it's $120 a year or whatever. 37 Signals has now moved from freemium models to subscriptions with trials. So you get your 30 or 60 days for free, and beyond that, you get more. Roambi is a business intelligence service where they sell you seats, but they also sell servers. And of course, Evernote takes the traditional freemium model, some of it for free, and if you want to pay a little more, you get more money. The MEUM is the premium portion of that opportunity. They've kind of taken that lead and become a real bellwether for that business model. So there's a lot of different ways to think about subscriptions, to think about recurring revenues, and the ways you might be able to generate income from them. The third way, and the way that none of us really like to talk about, but we will anyway because it's a viable way of making money, and at the end of the day, we're not in business unless we can make money, is doing ads. It's as old as the hills. I will encourage you to think a little differently about this model as well. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. Now, we've been inundated in the App Store with these dinky little banner ads with garbage in them that none of us really like very much. But the reality is that there are actually a lot of different options for this. The internet started the exact same way. All we had were banner ads, and Facebook is really good at this. They put a lot of banner ads on their website. But it wasn't until Google AdWords came along that suddenly we had different ways, different models to work with, and suddenly we realized that advertising worked in different ways. Twitter's invented promoted tweets, Facebook with their banner ads, Google with their AdWords, but then PBS has a completely different model. They have a sponsorship model. It feels real natural. Think about listening to some of the podcasts, and almost every one of those advertisements within the podcast make perfect sense because they fit right in with the model and the customer base and the kind of people that they're selling to. So again, maybe one of these makes sense, maybe none of these make sense, maybe 2 or 3 of these make sense for your business. Just something to think about, something different to move us ahead, to move us from this world of one-time paid applications where none of us make money to a way of building a business. The next thing that I think worth discussing is customer acquisition. Now, we talked about how to make money off of existing customers, but the reality is we got to get new customers in order to expand the base. So that's where we start talking about customer acquisition. And as we've already discussed, new customers are hard and expensive, but they're required. So what are we going to do? I want to give you a little framework for thinking about customer acquisition and how you can go about doing it cost effective. Because it doesn't make any sense to throw money after cost acquisition. The pricing of your product, the revenue that you generate from your product is directly related to the money that you can charge, the money that you can pay out in advertising to bring customers on board. So I'm going to give you a couple terms to think about here, and this is all from a guy named Jason Cohen, smartbear.com, who is a very smart bear, by the way. And it starts with this idea of monthly recurring revenues, and that's the amount that we charge on an average per month basis for a customer. The second thing we'll talk about is lifetime value of a customer. How long do we expect this customer to stay with us and keep paying? How much money do we derive from these people over time? One of the neat things about this post that Jason did is that he interviewed a whole bunch of startup companies. And the problem is when you're just starting out, you have no idea what these numbers are supposed to be. And Jason found that the average customer with the companies that he interviewed were all around for about 20 months. Now, I did this for recurring revenue companies, but I'll give you a way to frame this for non-recurring revenue as well. And the third is the one that we really care about, right? This is the cost of actually acquiring a customer. That's the cost of getting a single customer. But keep in mind that that's not the total lifetime value because we got other expenses to run the business. I don't know about you guys, but I really like to pay myself. I like to do the operations costs and a bunch of the other things that need to take place. And the last thing, of course, we got 2 more, sorry. Conversion rate, about 1% of our customers that come to the site converts. And the last is our cost per click, and that's nice. Oh, good, that doesn't show up. Somebody's tweeting and I'm getting to see it on my screen. So how much can we pay for an ad to get customers to click through to our website? So I looked at 4 basic models here and did the math for you automatically. $4.99 in the App Store, that means we actually get $3.49. I broke this out. I basically assumed that we break that revenue over 20 months. You get 0.7 of 1 cent to spend on marketing in that case. I don't know about you guys. I can't think of too much marketing I could do for 0.7 of 1 cent. Charge $20 a year. That's a really nice price point. Seems to be becoming popular in the App Store. Feed Wrangler is at $18 a year, but $20 is comfortable. It's a little less than $2 a month. People feel like they're willing to pay that. It's a magazine subscription. We've been told for years that this is a viable price point. Well, that's 7 cents cost per click. And then we get into higher end products, $5 per month, $50 per month, and we can see how the cost per click revenue on each one of those expands. So how does this work with some different kinds of promotion that we might want to do? Well, if I wanted to buy the finance calculator AdWord through Google, it would cost me about $2.51. In order to make that work, I'd have to have a $50 per month product, and that might very well be the most expensive calculator on the face of the planet at those kind of rates. Daring Fireball, John Gruber's website, 4 cents. Core Intuitions podcast, a great technical podcast if you're not a listener, 3 cents. So we can start to see how that $20 per year rate at least gets us in the ballpark of considering some promotion and figuring out how we can actually bring in customers. But I couldn't come up with a single example, not a single example, where $4.99 one time actually worked. So let's think about cross-platform. We went through this one already. One place to buy, blah, 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 blah. That's a huge problem. In fact, I think it's the center of this entire App Store problem that we have. And I want to remind everyone that it is so outside of Apple's interest to ever change this that it will never be done. It is in Apple's interest to commoditize software. That's fine. It just means that these are the rules we have to live within, and that means we got to figure out how to adjust to that world. But I will tell you, the cross-platform doesn't just mean the App Store. If we start thinking about Android and Windows and Mac and web, suddenly our place where we can promote and distribute our applications changes substantially. Suddenly we got, 7 places we can distribute. And that makes a big difference. It changes the way we think about our products. It changes the way we think about promotion and price. It changes the way we think about distribution. And let's remember, it's not like iOS has the total ownership over every mobile user on the face of the planet. There's some massively large platforms out there. Even Mac OS, as small as it is still 75 million potential customers. Windows 7 and 8 alone, as much as we have been ripping it to shreds and that Microsoft has seen their better days, has had 550 million units distributed since Windows 7 shipped. Yeah, Android's great. iOS is great, 600 million. Android's right about at 1 billion now. And of course, web applications, we got 1/3 of the world's population that now has web access. So when we open that up, not only do we open up the places where we can distribute, we open up the kind of apps that we can sell, and we open up the kind of people that can use our stuff. Now, I'll go back to this. We looked at these 3 on the earlier slide with the little images and the numbers, and we saw that the average iPad app was 50 cents, average iPhone app is now 19 cents. Well, I did a little calculation of the top 100 apps in the Mac App Store and found that the average price point was $22.52. So even if your only goal is to still sell one-off priced applications, going cross-platform is in your best interest. You can charge way more for the app. Almost everybody I know who has a Mac app and has an iOS app sells their Mac app for a lot more than they sell their iOS app for. Now, cross-platform doesn't come without its costs. There's a lot to think about here. And that's what makes it hard. You got to think about how your customers interact with your products. You got to think about cross-platform technologies. It becomes really important to start thinking about native C code and native HTML code if your goal is to develop it on multiple platforms. We got more screen sizes than you can ever imagine the minute you go to Android. It's ridiculous and unbelievable. You've got decisions about which stores to be on. You've got decisions about servers and other kinds of costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these are the trade-offs, right? You build an app, you don't have to worry about these things. When we start building businesses, these are decisions that we really need to make. 5. There's a global market out there. When I started in the 1990s, Palm pretty much sold every unit they had. I think they sold 2 million units that first year, and they sold them all in the US. Sure didn't have to worry about any other language. But that ain't the case now. Now the world's pretty diverse. Apple actually sells more units, this is iOS, actually sells more units outside of the US than they do in the US. That creates a huge change, a huge problem for us as developers. If you saw the auto layout stuff this morning, that helps from a development side, but there's a huge side to this as far as thinking through what we need to do for localizations. I think in terms of icons, minimizing the amount of text in my apps, how we localize dates and numbers. Think about text layout. You know, the entire Middle East goes right to left instead of left to right. You got to think about Far East character sets and how those are displayed. Again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of things to think about here. But at a minimum, I can give you a place to start. The place to start is just localize your app description in the App Store. Have you ever searched for an app in the App Store and you come across a German description instead of an English description, but you don't read German? Not an app I'm downloading. So at least if we localize the descriptions themselves, at least it gives us a framework in which people in other countries can at least download our applications, even if the apps themselves are still in English. So we have a talk later today on this topic of accessibility, and I encourage everybody to go to it. I wanted to add this. This isn't necessarily a case of globalization, but this is important as a case of appealing to a broader customer base, which is really what this section is really all about. Accessibility on iOS is about the most easy thing I have ever done in my entire career. Apple has made this brain dead simple. VoiceOver is an unbelievably amazing technology. And I've actually gotten more sales because I localized, or because I accessibilitized, we'll go with that. Because I accessibilitized our calculator app, I've got people who otherwise had no calculator to use using ours. So it proved to be, and believe me, those folks talk to each other a lot. So that was a huge advantage for us as a company. And I highly recommend everybody go to that session later today and localize your apps. Matt Gemmell wrote I hope that's how you pronounce his name, I've never actually met him personally. I gave you a nice little short bit.ly address there. This is 3 years old, but it's a very informative, persuasive argument for why, if I haven't gotten you to do this in the last 30 seconds, why you should go talk to Matt and get him to do, and why you should read this article and go do accessibility. So number 6 is think product. Okay, we're coming back to a comfort zone here, right? We're all used to thinking about product. But I'm going to give you a few high-level things to think about. We'll move through this fairly quickly. First thing I want you to do is think about simple. You know, nobody in their right mind is going to enter this much data and information. It just doesn't happen. There's a reason nobody uses apps like HighRise, where they only do so under the threat of being fired by their bosses. It's way too much to enter. Yeah, I did this iTunes stuff, by the way, for like a 30,000 song collection because I'm anal retentive and ridiculous, but most people won't do it. I came up with this idea a couple years ago. It's called single box theory. And the idea behind the single box theory is that people are far more likely to use and keep using your application the less work it is for them to do it. The closer you can get to a single box for data entry, the much easier it is for people to use and keep using your product. Google nailed this one. There isn't multiple boxes, there's one box, and you type what you want into it, and Google figures it out and shows you, sometimes not the right, but they show you results and then give you a way of fixing that. You want to see results from a specific website, you type in eliainsider.com space blah, 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 and it goes out and finds that. I don't think it would find blah, blah, blah on my website, but you never know. Twitter, same kind of concept. Single box, right? A lot easier than email, which is a lot of reasons why a lot of people have abandoned email in relation to it. The calendar app is traditionally an application that has required a lot of entry, right? We got to enter the start time, the end time, the dates, the recurring, whether we want an alarm, who it's with, where it is, who we're having the meeting with. You know, there's a lot of information that goes into an average one. But I love this feature in Calendar. You hit the little plus sign, you say, oh, I've got a meeting with Johnny at 3 p.m. on Friday, and it figures out where to put it. So maybe there's some more data and information that you actually have to enter yourself, but it takes care of the 80% rule. And I think that's really important. The second is think depth. Depth is important from the perspective of getting your first-time users in and using an application and becoming comfortable with it, and then getting more out of it. This is our Power One app. We display these calculations in little templates that pretty much anybody can pick up. We have hundreds of these in a library that anyone can download and use. And they're easy to do. It's, by the way, in its beauty of iOS 6 design glory, by the way. We're in the process of updating to iOS 7. But what we've done for our power users is actually give them a little language behind the scenes that they can write their own stuff. And we get lots and lots of customers who come in, they start using the product and go, boy, I'd like to tweak this. Or boy, I'd like to do this slightly different. Or I got this idea for a calculation that I'd like to do, and they write their own. I've got thousands of customers out there writing their own templates. So we're able to differentiate between the primary users, those who are going to use the product for the most part and just be able to do a calculation, and those that want to do a little more. I encourage you to think about design. Yeah, pretty ugly, isn't it? This was one of the first apps that ever shipped for the App Store. You'll notice it's the only slide where I didn't tell you which app it is, too. These actually were a bunch of good guys. I knew them back in the Palm days. And in the Palm days, this, by the way, would have been a perfectly acceptable and beautiful application. But obviously, Apple changed that entire world pretty substantially. You know, we don't just think about form when we think about design. We think about function. It's not just about how it looks, it's how people interact with it. Another one, think offline. Oh, this stuff drives me nuts. I can be in two places in my house and not have reception on my computer. And I mean, come on, you're going to tell me I can't do anything because I don't have an internet connection? There's still too many places in the world where this is a problem. There's still too many times where I walk in someplace, I walk downtown, I'm having lunch, and can't get an internet connection. And yeah, we got good AT&T connections where I live. So I really encourage everybody to think in terms of dual mode use cases. iCloud's not perfect. It breaks a lot. But the reason that iCloud breaks a lot is because it's trying to solve this problem. And this is a very, very complicated problem to solve. There's a number of companies out there that will help you try to solve it, or you can do it yourself depending on what's appropriate for your situation. But that's exactly why iCloud has problems, because it's designed to be used in a world where, okay, I can add a new calendar event even if I don't have an internet connection. And it'll figure out later that that's a new thing and it needs to synchronize it when you do. Speaking of calendar events, think connected. So obviously, this is me being connected across all my devices. My iOS, my iPad, my iPhone, and my Mac. But the other way to think about this is one-to-one and one-to-many. So what happens when I want to work with everybody else in this room? You know, we're all signed up on Glassboard now. Talk about a great one-to-many solution and how that gets implemented. Again, These may not be decisions that you'd make if all you're doing is writing an app. But when you're building a business, we got to think about this stuff. Finally, in my last topic, I will get to the one piece of technology that I'm going to discuss today, and it's thinking about the whole stack. This might be the most important thing to think about out of all the things that we're doing. You know, when building an app, it's easy, maybe even desirable to outsource everything. It happens a lot faster. We do it in our code. We use CorePlot in one section of our code in Power One. I'm not certain that that's the right choice for a business. It was the right choice for building an app because it was done. But if I'm building a business, I got to figure out what happens when that app looks horrible on iOS 7, which it now does, by the way. And who's going to update that code that I have no clue what's going on internally? But it's not just that, right? It's all of the technologies that you're using as a business. Tim Cook said this: "We believe that we need to own and control the primary technologies behind the products we make." I think this is one of the most important things that Tim Cook's ever said. We're so busy getting our products done that we make decisions that impact our businesses. You know, it's true. There are some things that just can't be outsourced. This is like a year old, by the way. So this. Other things are fair game, though. You know, you don't want to limit your success, as Brent Simmons says, because you didn't write your own server. It's a good question. We got to think about what technologies we need to learn. We got to think about what technologies we want to outsource. We need to think about what technologies we want to bring in help to help us do. And these are all questions. You know, Apple introduced the iPhone 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago. I think that's right. You know, they developed their own apps, they developed their own operating system, they developed their own hardware. You know, obviously there's some things when we're starting a business that we're not going to outsource, that we're not going to insource. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not ready to build a data center for my new project. I'd rather let Rackspace and Amazon take care of that. And even Apple didn't develop everything, right? They didn't build their own cell towers. They didn't build their own cell network. The point, though, I think through all this is to think about the issues. The point of this entire presentation is to think about what you want to accomplish, think about what your goals are, and how you're going to achieve those goals. If an app, by the way, is what you want to do, if an app is what you think is the right thing for your business, then bully for you. That's the way to go. Just think through it first. But more and more, I really think those days of just writing an app and being able to make some money off of it are pretty much gone. And that's why I think it's important for us to be thinking about building businesses instead of building apps. Thanks. I'll be happy to take questions or comments if you've got them, or not. Say the last part again? It hasn't worked. Boy, who was recently? Who just did this? The task list application Clear just tried this. They had a 1.0 version. I mean, we're talking a $2 application here, something insanely cheap like that. $1.99, and the whole world caved in on them when they tried to release the next version. You know, it completely rebuilt for iOS 7, and that's a lot of work. These guys just try to make a couple bucks more, and the whole world had a hissy fit. We got away with it once in the early days of the App Store. We released a product, Power One, originally under the name Fast Figures, and then we decided we were trying to do something different with it that didn't gain the kind of acceptance we wanted, and we transitioned people over, and for the most part, but those were the real early days, and things have changed. I know I pissed off a lot of people and lost a lot of customers because of it. But Clear, man, I mean, that was a much more highly visible application, and they ended up moving back to a free product. I think if you're going to move in that direction, the way to do it is to think about using in-app purchase for upgrade components. So again, use that in-app purchase effectively. It's $2.99 to get the base thing, and then we add on this component for another 99 cents, or that component for another 99 cents. Calculator apps do this a lot with skins. You get a couple of skins for free, and then if you want to do more of them, it's a couple bucks to get a pack of a bunch of them, kind of thing. Yeah, I outsourced it. Again, not the decision you necessarily, well, we were in a unique situation. Samsung came to us and asked us if we would port, and basically paid us to do it. And I had some friends that I'd been wanting to work with for a while, so I ended up bringing them on board to do it. None of this was possible a few years ago. Our engine that we used to do all of our calculation stuff and translate the notation into templates was all written back in the late 90s. It was all done on Dragon Ball processors, which were 16 kilohertz processors, and it was designed to run really, really fast. So we've been lucky from that regard. So a big chunk of our code we've basically been able to pick up and move with us wherever we've gone, and we were able to do that with the native development kit on Android. Probably the biggest challenge of Android is the plethora of devices and the incompatibility of those devices, and the breadth of operating systems that you have to target. It's the iOS world. Until you start developing for Android or other platforms where you have to support 4 or 5 operating systems, Apple's insistence on basically just cutting off people with old operating systems is really a huge advantage for all of us. Let them be the scapegoats on that one, because nobody else does it. So that part of it was painful. I mean, there's cases where we have an email feature in the application that works on one device model and doesn't work on another device model. And it's very device model specific. So there's some very big oddities about that. I'm trying to remember, there was somebody, a big company a few years ago that ported, maybe it was Netflix actually, and they released it for just a handful of devices first, and they got a bunch of slack for it. But frankly, I don't see any other way to do that, because the Android's really broad. There's a lot to it and a lot to figure out. And it has its own unique challenges, just like iOS has. Yeah. So let's see. We get, so we ended up using the same. So the reason I'm an expert in all this stuff, by the way, is that we've tried almost everything we can related around the standard purchase model, the quote-unquote premium model. We have a number of apps at $5. We have some spin-off apps at $1, $2, and $3 on iOS. We did some free versions, some light versions with in-app purchase. So we've tried quite a few of these different opportunities over the first 4 or 5 years. So when we moved to Android, we really didn't feel like we had a choice at that point to redo or rethink the entire model. That's something that we're in the process of doing now. So we went with a very similar model. We have free versions. We have some that are $1 to $4 and some that are $5, and kind of spread the app out across a number of different products. From a revenue perspective in that regard, Android's definitely paying us a lot less. We get 10% of the Android revenue is Kindle, and about 10% of the iOS revenue is Android. So from that regard, it's not a model that works really well. But that's exactly where a lot of this presentation has come from. I've been thinking pretty hard about how to change those models, how to do a better job with these products, how to build apps that we can actually make a living off of and move forward with. And I think that's going to include freemium products and some other changes in the way we approach the platform overall. Thanks. Very good.